Thank you, Bridie. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I just want to begin by introducing you to a few people that can't be here today, but they would be happy for me to share with you a little bit of their story. I want you to introduce you to Jess, who's a 30-year-old female who was invited to come to Scotland by her extended family for employment. And she arrived in Edinburgh some time ago, only to discover that the situation was quite different from what she anticipated. And she ended up in domestic servitude to a family in Edinburgh, working 24 hours a day, having one set of clothing to wear, being fed the scraps of food, her movement outside the property being controlled, until her health deteriorated somewhat and she was dumped in the street because she wasn't any use to them anymore. And she was picked up by one of our partner agencies, homelessness organisations in Edinburgh, and identified as a victim of trafficking. Or introduce you to Azeda, who was fleeing persecution overseas and came to Scotland and was then subsequently exploited. She had to look after an elderly gentleman and provide personal care in his home 24 hours a day on call, and in the evenings was also a victim of sexual exploitation as well. Or for Ronnie, who was working in the city and living at his place of employment, if you can call it that, a place of employment. He was paid in the provision of accommodation, which was a metal container outside his place of work, and he was also paid in alcohol, which resulted in him becoming addicted to alcohol. Or to Stefan, who fled a forced labour situation in another part of Scotland, having refused to work for nothing or for very little, and been beaten up as a result. And he walked for days and was found rough sleeping in the streets of Edinburgh. So these are some of the people that I just want you to hear their story, the people that are living around us and are often hidden in plain sight. And today I just want to share with you a little bit of an introduction into what human trafficking is. It can be a confusing term to use, and it's very misunderstood. So I just want to give a little bit of context about human trafficking, some guidelines around some of the risks that we see associated with Ukrainians arriving in the city that I know many of you are working with and working alongside, and also some pointers about signs and your role in response. Now, we're not going to be able to go into it in detail, but we're really happy at SOHTIS to be able to tailor training for your team specifically, and you can contact me following this event to arrange that. So I'm just going to share my screen now. If you have got questions as you go along, I encourage you to put them in the chat, because often we forget by the time it comes to the end what we thought of. So please do that, and we'll try our best to get to you, as Bridie said, as we go along. So I'll just share my screen now and hope that my techie works. I'm not very good at the technical parts. Okay, so the stories that I've shared, Jess, Azedi, Ronnie and Stefan, this is human trafficking. This is what human trafficking looks like in Scotland. The definition of trafficking, I'm just going to expand my screen. The definition of trafficking under the Scottish legislation is an action carried out for the purposes of exploitation or with the knowledge of likely exploitation of another person. And it can really be described as the trading in adults or children for personal gain or profit. It's sometimes referred to as modern slavery. So you may have come across that term. In Scotland, the Scottish Government have chosen to use the term human trafficking, but for the purposes of our conversation today, modern slavery can be used interchangeably. There are some differences, but for the purposes of this today, it's more or less an umbrella for term which includes compelled service. The other term that you hear quite often, particularly in the media, is smuggling. And one of the main differences between smuggling and human trafficking is smuggling is an offence against the state, and human trafficking is an offence against a person. However, often we see people who begin their journey being smuggled and have chosen to make that journey and perhaps have paid for the journey, end up being trafficked people. So they end up being exploited on their route. So that is some of the definitions of human trafficking. Basically, human trafficking reduces people to commodities, and they're held captive, not so much by chains or physical restraint, but in that sense, but often violence, fear, intimidation, and extreme poverty are the things that hold people captive in traffic situations. And we'll see a little bit more about that later. So in terms of the response to human trafficking globally, our legislation, we're very fortunate in Scotland. We have some of the best human trafficking legislation. It's recognised widely as a very good piece of legislation, and the trafficking legislation in Scotland is based on the European Convention Against Trafficking, ECAT, and also in accordance with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, 8.7 in particular. Now, I'm not going to go into this today, but if you are interested in these kind of aspects of it, I'm really happy to follow up with people afterwards. And as I say, the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Scotland Act took place in 2015, enforced in 2015, and on the back of that, the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Strategy, the first one from the Scottish Government in 2017, and that is under refresh at the moment. Again, if anyone wants more information on that, I can provide that. I sit on some of the action area groups for the implementation of the strategy, so I can help with that. But I think just safe to say that since this has come into place in Scotland in 2015 and 2017, it really emphasises the fact of how important the Scottish Government and others believe this human trafficking, the incidence of human trafficking to be in the country. And I just want to share some of the scale of human trafficking with you, both at a global and a national level. So it's said to be the greatest human rights issue of our time, human trafficking. The illegal trading in human beings is right up there beside the trading in illegal arms, and is only really, it is less than the trading in illegal drugs, but it's growing epidemically. It's fast growing industry, illegal industry. There's over 40 million people thought to be held in slavery throughout the world today. That is a well accepted figure and well recognised by most authorities, if not all. And just to give that some context as well, that is about 3 times the number of people that were held during the transatlantic slave trade, the 3 centuries of the transatlantic slave trade. It's about 3 times that number in the world today. So it's really mind-blowing. You can't take it in, can you, that 3 times the number of people held across 3 centuries of the transatlantic slave trade are actually held in slavery at the moment. So the abolition of slavery didn't end maybe when some of us thought that it might have. It just took a new form, and a very insidious one as well. It's a multi-billion-pound industry, and that's what drives it. Lots of money to be made and lots of potential slaves. So at the moment, sometimes it's referred to as disposable people. Just like I said about Jess, who was just disposed of in the street, we come across quite a number of people who are just dumped when they become no more use to their exploiters, and they are disposed of because there's many more people that can potentially take their place. In the UK, it's thought that there's around 136,000 victims of human trafficking at any one time. And over the last few years, we've recovered around about 10,600 each year. So less than 10% being recovered each year across the UK. And in Scotland, contrary to the UK trends, which shows that the largest percentage of recovered people are British men, in Scotland, what we see is over 90% of the recovered people in Scotland being non-native English speakers. Now, that does raise questions about how our ability to identify British people that are trafficked, and how we suspect that there's many British people being trafficked, but we're probably just not looking for them, so we don't find them, but also just focuses our mind on this conversation that we're particularly having today about non-native English speakers and Ukrainians arriving in Scotland, that the risk of trafficking is high. And this is something that's not only, you know, something that SOHTIS is talking about, but the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe has made statements in recent days about this. And this is one of the statements that they've made, that the humanitarian crisis is in its early phase. The prevention of human trafficking through addressing vulnerabilities of people seeking refuge should be a priority for all stakeholders. So that includes all of us that are attending today. We all have a stakeholder in this, no matter where it is we're coming from, what organisation it is, whether we're a member of the general public, whoever we are, we've got a role to play in this work. And I really believe that today, this is the time for action to prioritise prevention by empowering and equipping Ukrainians as they arrive to recognise the signs of exploitation, meaning that wherever they go in the UK, they'll be able to protect themselves and they'll be able to protect their peers and others around them. We've got a really significant opportunity at the moment as people arrive to be able to protect them for the rest of the time that they're here and wherever else they go. So a little bit more about human trafficking. What are the types of human trafficking that we're likely to see in Scotland, and that we would likely be a risk for Ukrainian arrivals? Forced labour, the highest number of, the largest percentage of people recovered in Scotland from human trafficking are victims of forced labour, and it crosses almost all industries. So we'll find people in agriculture, which you won't find surprising, I'm sure, construction industry, hospitality industry, retail sectors, the service industry, so places like traditionally would be associated with human trafficking around car washes and nail bars and places like that, but also extending to many other places. So people that are coming to the UK from Ukraine who are keen to find employment are at risk of getting into forced labour situations. Sexual exploitation, also a risk for Ukrainians arriving, and domestic servitude, which I've mentioned already. Someone that we were working with, a victim of domestic servitude, and there's much of it going on, and real concerns about people arriving and coming into people's homes, and on what might be the case within those settings, even if it didn't, it wasn't premeditated that that's what they would come for, but then what situations arise following that around domestic servitude, and criminal exploitation, which can take the form of involvement with drugs, so cuckooing, holding drugs, storing drugs, sort of county lines things, distributing drugs. This is where there's concerns about young people arriving from Ukraine. We know that young people are more at risk of drug trafficking and criminal activity around that, and could be exploited for that purpose. So having an awareness of that for Ukrainians arriving is important as well. So these are the kind of four main areas that we would have concerns about, and are the types of trafficking that we see happening in Scotland on a day-to-day basis. So what are the drivers of trafficking? Well, for this conversation, I've made a bit of a brainstorm here. I'm sure you'll be able to think of more. But war is at the top of the list. Displacement of people. This is some of the things that are the drivers of trafficking. And also people arriving from a war, and from a traumatized situation, having travelled and seen some horrific things, and then arriving and living in poverty and living in relative isolation as well, because they're isolated from many of their family and friends, and also their situation in terms of a home is sometimes uncertain. So they may be living with a host family, but they also may be living in hotel accommodation while they wait that placement. And we know from the research that's been done both here in the UK and overseas, and some evidence that we're seeing at the moment coming out of Poland and other places that are reception centres for Ukrainians, that people living in hotel accommodation in large groups can be at increased risk of trafficking as well. So whilst we are trying to find safe places for people, we should be aware that within that safety, there could be risks associated with the safety that we're putting in, that we think we're putting in place. So putting people, vulnerable people, and grouping them together in accommodation may be reducing risks of some elements and putting some protections in place for them, but there's other elements of risk that can be associated with that. I guess what I would say in the wider context in terms of trafficking and drivers is that we should remember that everyone has their own circumstances and we can't just fit people into a box. And this is what comes back to our ability to identify British victims and other nationalities that may be trafficked. If we have too strong sort of stereotype around who might be trafficked, well, then we may fail to see others. So keeping our minds open to the groups of people that we're coming into contact with and what the drivers might be. So where can human trafficking be found? Well, the truth is in Scotland that is being identified in every local authority. All 32 local authorities have identified human trafficking. So it's near each of us. Wherever you're coming from today, whether you're part of the Edinburgh locality, geography, or whether you're calling in to this call from somewhere else in Scotland, human trafficking has been identified in every city and every town. It's within each of our neighbourhoods, but it's within each of our areas of influence to do something about it. Human trafficking, for the most part, is serious organised crime. It takes a community to traffic a person. It's generally not done by one person. It takes a community to traffic a person, and it takes a community to recover them. It takes all of us playing our role, coming together, and I'm so grateful to you for coming on to this call today, because it does take each and every one of us in our expertise if we're going to address the situation and the awfulness of human trafficking in Scotland. So maybe just when we're talking about that and how close it is to us, you may want to think, have you seen the signs of human trafficking? And following this event, I would encourage you just to think that through. It's a lot of information to take in at the moment. I'm conscious of that, but hopefully in the days ahead, you will reflect on the information that you've been given and seek out some more and think about where you might have seen trafficking. So just to help you with that, this is something that we use to try and help us to understand what human trafficking actually is. So I'm just going to give you a couple of little really practical tools today. Human trafficking is broken down into 3 elements. These 3 elements must be there and evident for this to be a case of human trafficking if someone is going to be processed through the national referral mechanism and recognised as a trafficked person in the UK. However, just to add a caveat to that, in Scotland, under the legislation, we only need the act and the purpose. And for anyone under the age of 18, also, it's just the act and the purpose that are required. And saying that, it's useful, I think, as practitioners, to just have an understanding of a breakdown of what human trafficking may look like. Now, you wouldn't need to know all of this to be able to make a report or to speak to someone about a trafficking issue, but it gives you a little bit of a guidance as to what it might look like, and in particularly about the Ukraine situation. So I thought that we might flag some things up So first of all, the Act. Now, human trafficking, it can be confusing because people tend to think that it means someone has been moved, transported from one place to another, particularly over borders. That's often the stereotype that's held. But travel between two places is not a requirement for it to be a case of human trafficking in the UK. So we're thinking about recruitment as being part of the Act, as well as transportation. We're thinking about harbouring and receipt of persons. So if we think about risks for Ukrainians, we're thinking about people that are got an urgency to leave a destination, which puts them at risk. We're thinking about online recruitment of people. So people seeking a host family online, or someone making arrangements for them to come here, either a host or an extended family member who they don't really know. We're thinking about people that are organising travel for others. So we have people here in the UK, many are well-meaning, they're arranging travel, they're paying for travel, they're trying to sort out all those arrangements for people. We've got people arriving at different points in Scotland, at different entry points, where we're not sure where they're arriving, we're not sure who they are necessarily. They're being collected by perhaps unknown people, which may be pre-arranged or may be opportunist. We also have people arriving and going into homes where you could see that there's a risk of harbouring at some point, or that someone's receiving people and then they're moving on somewhere else. And we're thinking about the future, or even some evidence at the moment, where host families break down and someone ends up homeless or are looking for another host family. So you can see how some of these practices that I'm talking about at the moment, that would normally be very unusual in Scotland and would be real indicators of trafficking, actually have become quite normalised in our conversation. We hardly ever spoke about host families until a few months ago. That wasn't something, if we had been finding someone on the internet who was recruiting for someone to come from an overseas place and live in their home, the red flags would have been flashing for us. But now that's very normalised, and there's lots of good work going on around that, but we should be alert to the risks associated with it. So that's around the Act. The means is how it's done. So how is someone kept in a trafficking situation? It's irrelevant really whether the victim or the potential victim has given consent, and that is quite important in this aspect for the Ukrainians, because Ukrainians have come and possibly have entered into an agreement with someone and consented to some terms and conditions that we're not aware of, for them to come and live with a host family. Maybe that agreement has been that they would provide some service in order that they would do that. Maybe they've received the payment of their travel in order to come. And so there's been some kind of negotiation. But what is clear is that you can't give consent to exploitation. So even if you've given agreement to do something, you can't consent to exploitation. And so traffickers will target those that are most vulnerable, and they may allow the person to feel like they've been consensual in this arrangement, but they can't give consent to being exploited. So the things that are probably the most appropriate, or any of these in this list, and it's just a short list of possible means that people would use, are the giving and receiving of payments, the abuse of power, because as hosts, we do hold a huge amount of power for people that are arriving, fraud in terms of encouraging people to sign up for benefits or whatever. There's lots of evidence about people setting up bank accounts on behalf of people, helping them to do that. But you can understand how there may be some exploitation. associated with that as well. People certainly could take advantage of it. So these are the means. And then we have the purpose, which we've already spoken about. The purpose, why it's done. So forced labour, sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, and forced criminality being the main areas of the purpose. So hopefully this is a little bit of a help to help us to imagine what it looks like for someone who potentially is in a situation of exploitation, or prevent someone from getting into that situation. So having an awareness of that. The other thing that is useful to know is around how to spot the signs. Now, we can't go into this in detail today, and it will vary. The signs that you're looking for will vary according to the client group that you work with, the area of work that you're involved in, whether you're a member of the general public and that's what your interest is today in attending. And so if you want more detailed support around this, we're happy, SOHTIS would be happy to give you that information. So it's just really headline facts that I'm giving today. There's 5 areas that we should think about when we're thinking about spotting the signs. The first one, restricted freedom, can be an indicator, if we observe it, of human trafficking. Now, some of the things that we might think of in terms of the Ukraine response to this is if we are working with someone and they're not holding their own ID, so maybe there's someone that's accompanying them all of the time to any appointments that they're attending, or they don't seem to be coming alone. They are afraid to speak to authorities, and someone else is always kind of holding their ID for them, or they don't have it, they can't provide it. That is one of the signs. They don't seem to have freedom to speak to family and friends, communicate. They might say, oh, there's problems with communication or whatever. That would be another indicator of restricted freedoms. Just not engaging with authorities or NGOs. If we're finding it difficult to engage with people that are arriving, well, then there should be, or even as that time goes on, it might be when they arrive, it's fine, but as time progresses, that engagement becomes more difficult. These would be signs. Displays of behaviour that might raise concerns. Someone is acting as if they're being instructed by another. They'll look as though they're being observed. They're anxious. They're distrustful of authorities. They believe that they must provide a service or something like that in order to be here. And sexualized behaviour as well, inappropriate sexualized behaviour. Now, these are just some of the things. There's many behaviours that would be indicators. And what I should say to you as well is when we're working with vulnerable people, a lot of these indicators are actually very common across lots of vulnerabilities. So I'm not saying that if you see one of these things, oh, this is human trafficking. What we're looking at is the breadth of things, and if there's red flags across each of them or many in one area, we should be thinking, do we need to think more about this? Do I need to have a further conversation about this, or do I need to speak to my colleagues about it? Do I need to explore this a little bit more? Working conditions. Now, we know the evidence is that the Ukrainians that are arriving are desperately keen to work and get employment. This puts them really at risk. So we're looking at things like double checking that they've not had to pay in order to get a job. In many countries, paying to be recruited is quite common. So you would give a fee to a recruitment agency. That is illegal in this country. That's one thing that has been cropping up. So if you can be looking out for that. Always checking that they've got a contract of employment, that the terms and conditions are clear, that they've been given the correct training and equipment to do the job that they say that they're doing. So, for example, someone who says that they've got a job doing cleaning or working with chemicals or anything like that, that they've got protective hand you know, just simple questions like that about what do you have to do your work, and things like that can help to shine a light. And these are conversations that we can just have in general with people as we're supporting them, as we're building relationships with them. It's not an interrogation, it's just in general conversation. There's things that we can ask that would give us indication around their working conditions and their living conditions. So in terms of their accommodation, so do they know the address where they live? Do they know the people that they're living with? So there may be people that are coming to host families that have already been checked and safeguarded, but then do they move on somewhere else? Does anyone else move into that home? Do those circumstances change? Have they all been offered employment where the accommodation is provided? Now, there's been some issues raised around that just in recent weeks and months. Ukrainians being offered employment and accommodation beside that employment, and it may be absolutely legitimate. I'm not saying that every employer who provides accommodation is an exploitative, but these are things that we want to be checking out with people. So yeah, and if they don't have any choice, it's important that Ukrainians have choice around where they live. So if they're not happy in a situation that they're in, that they're able to move. And if they're being restricted in that in any way, we should be concerned around potential exploitation. And the last one being finances. And just as I mentioned a few minutes ago around bank accounts being set up, often these online bank accounts, being really careful around that, who's got access to the person's bank account as well. If someone else has been helping them to set that up, do they also have access to that bank account? In other areas of labour exploitation, we see that perpetrators are using legitimate employment. So employment that is legitimate and above the minimum, is the minimum wage or above, but the money is not actually going to the person, it's going to the perpetrator. So it's either going to the perpetrator's bank account or it's going into the person's bank account, but someone else has access to that account. So these are the kind of things. People being assisted to claim benefit as they arrive as well. Concerns around that. So just being aware of who has influence over people and who is assisting them, and always encouraging them to get official assistance, you know, from an NGO, from the Citizens Advice Bureau, or whoever it is that you network with and who your partners are, making sure that people have good, reliable sources of information across all the sectors, either statutory or the third sector. So these are some of the signs of trafficking. And as I mentioned earlier, OSCE have made some recommendations recently, and I just wanted to highlight some of them, a couple of them that are really relevant for our conversation today. And these were written really for our response, as we prepare our response to the Ukraine situation. The first being that all countries introduce immediate measures to inform people seeking refuge of the risks of human trafficking. And that is incumbent upon us in Scotland to do that. And I would suggest that that has to be more than just a piece of paper. I mean, it's great that we're giving out literature, and we have literature on our website, and the third sector and the Edinburgh City Council have been really helpful in providing literature. But the risk to people coming from Ukraine is significant in terms of human trafficking. OSCE have set that out, and so it's more important, it's more than just giving a leaflet to someone. There needs to be a conversation about this in order that we protect people while we have the opportunity to do so, because once they get into an exploitative situation, it becomes very difficult to, or it can become very difficult to find them. If someone is in a situation of domestic servitude, it can be really difficult to find that person. So it's important that we give them the information that they need. Enhance operations of anti-human trafficking hotlines, and the Scottish Government have provided some help and sort of telephone support available for people that may be victims of trafficking through Just Right Scotland and others, and we can provide more information about that if you need it. That we monitor locations known for high risks of human trafficking, so that we monitor points. There's entry points that we know of to the country, and Volunteer Edinburgh already doing a huge piece of work at Edinburgh Airport, which has been amazing, and is helping to guide people that arrive. But there's many people that are arriving who are not accessing that support, and these people are ones that we're really concerned about, and maybe not coming through the airport, but coming through other entry points, through the rail networks, road networks and others. So we need to really be thinking about how we monitor these locations for trafficking, and also provide necessary resources to ensure robust prevention and response, including assistance to victims and presumed victims of trafficking. It's really important that we put this in place now. If we don't put this in place now, we risk seeing people coming through the national referral mechanism later, and being victims of human trafficking, which would be a huge disaster for people. Why would it be a disaster? Because the effects of human trafficking and exploitation, research shows, are profound and enduring, even from the very moment of recruitment. That's what the research shows. So you don't have to be in an exploitive situation for 10 years or for 6 months for it to be damaging. The damage is profound and enduring from the moment of recruitment on people, their psychological well-being, and then subsequently their physical well-being. So it's really important that we take cognizance of the situation that we find ourselves in as a welcoming nation, doing all we can to provide a place of refuge for people, but that we take notice of the risks associated, and we look at some of the recommendations and see how we can best implement them. So we've said a lot. We've said a lot about the facts, but I just want to bring it back home. It's real people. When we talk about profound and enduring effects, we're talking about the people that we mentioned earlier, Jess, who was in that terrible situation of domestic servitude and was dumped in the street. And I'm really delighted to tell you today that her life is being transformed. She's been moved to a safe place. We're working with her. She's had a positive asylum decision, and she's doing well, and she's preparing now for safe employment. She has social connections and community connections, which mean that she's thriving. And as Eda, who I mentioned earlier as well, both their lives been turned around and given back the control that they had lost so that they can make their own choices and be empowered. Or like Max here, who was in criminal exploitation, and Stefan in labour exploitation. These are the people, these are the individuals. It crosses all societies, all age groups, all nationalities. We're talking about Ukrainians today. It's not only Ukrainians that are affected. There's elderly people. We work with elderly people. We work with very young people. And so we need to be aware that this is touching real lives, and the people that are arriving from Ukraine are already traumatized. They don't know that human trafficking is one of the greatest risks that they may face as they arrive in Scotland. So it's our role to really make sure that they're aware of what the risks are. So that just brings me laterally to our roles. What is your role? What is my role in this? The first thing I would say is be confident in your practice. We're all skilled practitioners. We're skilled at what we do. Just make sure that you add human trafficking knowledge into your practice. So many of us are accustomed to the importance of doing no harm. We're accustomed to areas of safeguarding. So just be aware of all of that, and also be confident in the practice that you do, and inform that by adding to it about human trafficking. Beware that victims of trafficking are not going to present as victims. very unlikely. They don't know that they're victims for the most part, and so it's our role to identify them and know how and where to report. And reporting is really easy. You should be aware of your own policies and procedures within your own organisation, your safeguarding policies. You might want to think about that, about whether it should include human trafficking if it doesn't already, but you can contact the Modern Slavery Helpline. You can do it anonymously. You can download the Unseen UK app to your phone. You can report that. You can encourage others to, you can encourage Ukrainians to download these apps to their phones so that they can report themselves. Victims can also use these lines as well, and you can contact SOHTIS for advice and guidance. Know your boundaries. It's not your role to investigate. As I said, it's serious organised crime for the most part, so be aware of that, that you're reporting, and that's all. And be aware that you may need emotional support. So talk to your team, talk to the people around you, and make sure that you have adequate support for yourself and your team when you're looking at these issues. I'm not going to go through the National Referral Mechanism process today, but just to say that it is the official process for people being identified as trafficked in the UK, and I'm very happy to explain it in more detail to people at a later date. I'm just conscious of time today. So just one little mention of our projects. So Project Light, we're recovering victims of trafficking and bringing them to safety and advocating. So if you need any help in that regard, we're here to support you. And also our Project Integrate, which is our long-term support for survivors of trafficking. And I'm happy to follow up with anyone on that as well. So enough from me, just to say, we believe that everyone deserves to live in freedom with dignity and respect. I'm sure you do too. And I'm grateful to you for joining this session today. I'm really happy to take questions. I'll just stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Huge thanks to you, Joy. We knew in advance that your experience and your knowledge and that of your team would just really help people at this stage. It's really quite eye-opening, but also that's actually going to build our skills for the future in terms of wider populations and different nationalities, and to raise wider awareness. I'm really interested in how you're prioritising prevention and about keeping our minds open. For me, the first time I came across it was in a rural area, and it was not something I would ever have thought, also for an elderly person. So I'm hugely grateful to you, but I'm also grateful to absolutely everybody who's come today. We're going to move into those questions in the spirit of into the sunlight, which I notice is the motto of the organisation. I'm actually going to go to a couple of people in the chat. I've tried to summarise some of the ones that are here. And I'm going to hand over to Dorota at Phoenix, if that's okay. Because what the question you've asked, Dorota, is what do we need to pay attention to? But I'm hoping as you've heard lots of those things. Is there anything else that from your experience, because Phoenix are hugely involved at the moment? So over to Dorota at Phoenix to in terms of your question. Do you feel your question's been answered on what you pay attention to?
Yes, hi, hello, thank you. Yeah, it was mentioned in the presentation. I was wondering if there's something in particular about the Ukrainians currently arriving. We know that probably this will mostly be women with children. So I guess this can give us some ideas. But yeah, it was mentioned, and it was also mentioned that the time is chasing us. So I'm not sure if we want to expand.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking the question. And I think that yeah, you're correct. The demographic is women and children predominantly, and I'm happy to follow up with you at Phoenix and provide any support around that, what you're seeing happening and how we can help you to respond to it. We are thinking about the areas of domestic servitude and sexual exploitation and people entering the labour market as well. So all of these areas are areas of risk, just making sure that people get into safe places. Yeah.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you, Dorota. I'm going to build on that point and actually ask if Lizzie from the Welcoming wanted to come in, who also makes a specific reference to domestic servitude. Again, the Welcoming have extensive experience of working with people who've come to Scotland from Afghanistan, from Syria and other places. Over to Lizzie at the Welcoming. that's if Lizzie's still here. Sometimes people have to leave, and I'm not maybe aware quite if they've had to leave early, if their time is pressed. So is there anything else that you would like to say, Joy, on the issue of domestic servitude as a specific question?
Yeah. Bridie, I think that domestic servitude is very hidden. You know, we're talking about hidden in plain sight, but it's very hidden. And, you know, once people are in those situations, it can be difficult to find them. So it's important that we know what host family situations are like, and just being able to follow people as they go through the system, know what their living conditions are, because their expectations may be that that's what they have to do in order to stay in a family home. And that's how the roof is over, above their head. So yeah, they're very vulnerable in that way. So it's something that we're going to have to be aware of across the sectors.
And maybe just, I think one of the specific questions Lizzie asked was whether or not to share information about SOHTIS on Facebook groups where there is just communication between members of the public. Would that be valuable? Back to you,
Yes.
Jill.
Yeah, we have signed up to a few groups, and you know, we have registered and occasionally put information into host family groups, particularly just to give people an awareness of any concerns. I mean, probably from that point of view, it's more likely that it's host families who are supporting people to find employment and things like that, or they've got a family living with them and they've said that they have employment, just to be aware of the signs that might be involved around that, making sure that people have got legitimate employment and what they're being offered is safe.
That's really helpful. And maybe just the one of the points you made earlier, that actually where there's a reluctance to work with other partners, a third sector or a statutory partner, that can sometimes be a symbol, even if they are trying to help somebody get work or advice. A reluctance to work with others means is there something there in that relationship. So I'm conscious of time, and I'm going to keep moving around the room, and I can see there's a hand up. Over to Kate. Kate, where are you from, and what's your question? Kate Osmond.
Hi, Bridie. This is actually Lizzie from the Welcoming. We had some technical issues, so I'm not two people. Just to go back very briefly, Joy, if you can hear me okay, and to asking about Facebook. I've joined a couple of Facebook groups about host families, and I was concerned. I appreciate your point that there's kind of a real mixture of intentions in those groups. There are clearly some genuine offers, and then some that I was kind of worried about. Would you suggest sharing, for example, your contact information or some information in those groups? I wondered just how best to go about raising awareness, and also even in some wider Facebook groups where, again, there's lots of real intent to help individuals, but perhaps a lack of awareness about the risks that you've really helpfully shed light on today.
Yeah, I think that if you do see things that you're concerned about, we would be happy for you to share them with us. And I sit on the safeguarding group for the Ukrainian response and human trafficking. So we're looking at risks and escalating those risks to others that are making decisions within Scottish Government. So if there is something that you're seeing that's concerning, I would be happy to raise that there. Or you can use the Modern Slavery Helpline. If you see things that, you know, whatever you see, I encourage you, report. We need to get better at reporting in this country of what we see. Just as members of the general public, we need to get better at reporting. You don't need to know all the facts. You just report whatever it is that you've seen that's concerning. So that may be a physical location that you might, you know, be at a car wash, getting your car washed at the weekend, and you think there's something not right here. Just report it. Report what you see, and equally, if there's something that you're concerned about online, reporting it, all the information comes back to Police Scotland, etc., and we'll look at all of that, and it helps to inform responses. So yeah, we need everyone's eyes and ears, basically, and yeah, and if you think that there's anywhere that's appropriate to share our contact details, really happy for that to be done. Thank you
so much, both Lizzie and Joy. And I see there's a request in the chat for the slides to be provided, and Joy, I'm assuming you're happy for us to do that. We'll make sure that those are distributed afterwards to everybody who signed up. I see a question from Carrie in the chat. Over to Carrie, which is about somebody not giving consent in terms of referral. Over to Carrie to ask that question.
Hi, yeah, I think it was just as I read it in the chat, really. So you've already touched on someone's reluctance to maybe engage with supporting organisations, and that in itself maybe being an indicator that something's not quite right. But I suppose on a practical level, what would you suggest if somebody sort of isn't ready or isn't willing to consent to having their case referred?
Yeah, absolutely, Carrie. It's a good question. So we work with lots of people who don't want to, for whatever reason, go through the national referral mechanism. And that's absolutely, as adults, obviously, if it's a minor, if it's under 18, well, you know, it's a child protection issue in Scotland. So it's dealt with as such. But as an adult, they need to give consent to going through the NRM. However, our Project Light will provide advocacy and support to people whether they go through the NRM or not. So even if they don't think that they're a victim of trafficking, if you're working with someone supporting them and you feel that they are a victim of exploitation, or there's concerns around that, well, we can provide some help and advocacy there, just to make sure that they're getting what they're entitled to, but there's no pressure for them to actually enter the national referral mechanism or make a formal statement of any kind. Sometimes people don't want to go through the national referral mechanism because they don't understand what it is. They think that they're going to have to speak to the police and all of that kind of stuff, and that's not the case. So they can actually get access to quite good support by entering it without having to go to police or, you know, tell their story over and over again or anything like that. So we can help to advocate either by supporting a practitioner directly if the client doesn't want to see us, so we can support you to support your client, or we can do work directly with the client.
Thank you, Carrie, for that excellent question. And Joy, every stage I feel I'm learning, and I'm sure we all are. I'm going to try and finish up, and there's one other question I noticed, which is about writing the policy, and that's come from Kelvin. In the spirit of keeping things moving, I'm just going to hand straight to you, Joy, on policy, because you referred to safeguarding policies. Is that the best place to embed, or is it separate policies? Over to you, Joy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it differs for different organisations, and within our project, like, we can give strategic support to organisations, so I can help to advise on that for each specific organisation. It does lend itself to being within a safeguarding policy. I think that that's probably what I would recommend, but looking at each organisation, I would tend to look across what they have in place and see where it best fits, and help to advise them to write a policy either on a trafficking response or within another policy that they have.
Joy, that's really clear. And it falls to me, I think, to say a huge thank you to you, Joy, for an incredibly eye-opening and informative summary, but equally an offer of help for the future in terms of training and resources. And please don't hesitate to contact SOHTIS, and the slides will be available from today. A huge thank you to everybody here who's come along and can actually help us in the journey of Into the Sunlight for those who come through Scotland, and a wider awareness for our wider populations in terms of the risks. Thank you to Volunteer Edinburgh, who are closely involved in the planning for today, and our comms team at EVOC. But back to Joy, a huge thank you. I hope it's been valuable for you. Over to Joy for the last word.
Thank you so much to everyone, and please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Thank you to EVOC for arranging it.
Yeah, lovely. Joy will be in touch, and thank you to everybody who's come today and made it happen. All the very best.